Hello, and welcome to this episode of Such a Nightmare, Conversations About Horror. My name is Katherine Troyer, and I'm so excited to get to be joined, as always, by Toni Tresca.
Hey there!
This is a podcast where the horrifically nerdy meets the terrifyingly academic, as we explore that fine line between the horrific and the horrible. Each episode looks at a specific horror text that is for better or worse, giving us nightmares.
And we are so excited to have you join us today for our episode on 2023's Scream 6.
So this is one of our Eerie Extras, which is sort of where we put all the things that we can't possibly fit anywhere else. And we have done an Eerie Extra for Scream 5 and now Scream 6 because they've come out at a time when we needed to be able to talk about them, but not in our normal lineup. And I must say that I'm much happier about talking about Scream 6 than I was Scream 5.
Absolutely. This is going to be a much different tone and I think type of conversation than the conversation we were having on our conversation of the last Scream. We, as anyone who has listened to our previous episodes of the Scream franchise well knows, we are big fans of the Scream franchise. We've done episodes on all of the original 4. We did an Eerie Extra on the 5th one. I haven't checked out the TV show. Have you checked it out?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like, I feel like that probably, it's not bad. It's just, it's one of those things where the first season was fine. In fact, had some really great moments, but it didn't need to continue beyond one season. And yet it did. And also it was kind of one of those things where it was like, I'm not sure I could articulate to you what they were hoping to achieve. Were they hoping to serialize the story? Were they hoping to have the story work for a new generation? Were they hoping to see what could happen in a new generation with the same idea? And the answer seems to be that they were just like trying to do all the things because really they were just trying to capitalize on having the franchise.
IP. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, so maybe I won't check out the Scream television show. I won't jump on checking it out. Because I mean, do, like, as I was saying, I love the Scream movies.
Yes.
On the whole, yes. This 5th Scream was a little bit disappointing. I wasn't super in love with a lot of the main cast that they introduced, or ultimately kind of the situation that they found them in. Is that kind of, to just briefly summarize our conversation about the last Scream, is there anything else you want to throw in there?
I think for Scream 5, they were really bandying about the word requel, right? Which is something that is somewhere between a remake and a sequel. And they were trying really, really hard to make it stand on its own, right? And I think that was their problem that they then decided to just sort of abandon in Scream 6, right? And Scream 6...
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yes, it's a sequel of Scream 5, so it's already a sequel more explicitly. But I think that they embraced the fact that no one was really interested in having Scream for a new generation. We were interested in continuing Scream and seeing what that would look like for a new generation. And I think that they figured that out in this one because it was much less heavy-handed about how much this was about the younger folks versus the OG crew.
Which is also ironic, though, because I think this Scream 6 features, just like in terms of pure screen time, far more of the new cast. And
well, it has to,
and
right?
It has to, because, I mean, as we can, you know what, let's just go ahead and talk about this film's development and some of the casting and controversy behind it.
Yes,
the real horror show, the behind-the-scenes drama. So first, I guess we can just
Toni
start
was
with...
like, do you want to hear all the drama? And I was like, of course I want to hear the drama. That's my favorite part about these episodes. Please.
I was like, this is an Eerie Extra. We're not supposed to go on that long. But, if you want it, I suppose we can get into the behind-the-scenes drama. So, most prominently, I mean, as anyone who has seen the film, and big major spoilers for Scream 6, and all of the Scream movies to follow in this conversation, but as anyone who's seen the film knows, Sidney Prescott does not make an appearance in the film, the character.
Correct.
And that is due to real-life salary negotiations and contract negotiations that happened with Paramount Pictures. Yeah, so Did you know about this?
I did. And I knew that the fans were really interested in saying that, we want to see Sydney some more, but we really respect Nev Campbell enough that we're willing to agree with her that if she's making these requests / demands, that she probably has good reason. So that's kind of the extent of my knowledge about it.
She issued a statement on June 6th after it was announced. So it was announced on June 6th that she was not going to be coming back, and she issued a statement where she said, "As a woman, I have to work extremely hard in my career to establish my value, especially when it comes to Scream. I felt the offer that was presented to me did not equate to the value that I brought to the franchise. It's been a very difficult decision to move on. To all my Scream fans, I love you. You've always been incredibly supportive to me. I'm forever grateful to you and what this franchise has given me over the past 25 years. So she was very candid about it, that it was just, she did not feel the offer that was presented to her adequately matched what she was worth. And so she walked. She couldn't think of walking onto a set where she felt so undervalued, she later went on to say.
And although I'm confident that her definition financially of what's being undervalued is probably different than my definition, just because I have never commanded impressive salary prices, I have to agree that I'm sure that she has faced, because we know for a fact that women and BIPOC actors do increasingly have their demands not met just for equity, right? Not even for top billing. Now, so what Scream 6 does is it has this one line that is almost a throwaway line where Courtney Cox's character says, something along the lines of, "Sydney's living her happily ever after. Don't you think she deserves it?" And I kind of wish there'd been a little bit more discussion there, I guess partially because I can't help but feel like that's an impossible thing for a character to have, like Sydney, after the life that she's had, particularly because she was roped back into it for Scream 5. But I'm glad that they gave her that if they were going to not have that character in there anymore.
Yeah.
Before we get too much further, just for the sake of people who, hopefully everyone has seen Scream 6 that is listening to this, but for people that may have seen it a little bit ago, do you have a spoil-free plot summary for us?
I can riff something into existence.
Yes, do it.
So it begins about a year after Scream 5 and those Woodsboro killings, and we see this kind of Fox situation in which these two students are kind of like creating a Scream-like situation with amazing actress Samara Weaving, who we could talk about a little bit more in a second. But then Ghostface shows up and does not like that they're impersonating him, kills them both, and then we realize this is the true start to the Scream movie. And we see now Sam and Tara are living in New York City, attending Blackmore University, and pretty much everybody from town has moved to New York. We're going to New York, baby! You've heard of Jason Takes New York. Get ready for Scream Takes New York.
Yes.
And so,
excellent.
Basically, you know what? That's pretty much it. I think that's a good setup. It's Scream, it's New York, it's college. It's basically Scream 2 meets Jason meets Manhattan.
Exactly. Without, the boxing scene on the roof where someone's head gets boxed off. So we
don't have to spend any time on a boat.
That is also true. What is life if you're not on a boat for half of a movie set in New York? Okay, so we were talking about the fact that there's less of a sense of tension between the OG crew and the newcomers, and a part of that's because Sydney's not present. Part of that's because Dewey's not present. Now we of course
he's
still
dead.
have, because he's dead. Although it's one of my favorite things to do is to read all of the pieces that people put together where they're like, just because someone's dead doesn't mean they couldn't be in the next one. Here's how it would happen. From, Dewey's character to...
Yeah, I was about to say, I have an argument.
Yeah.
I'm going to make later in this episode.
Excellent. Two, I just saw in the news that Parker Posey was like, I would be delighted to have my character come back, which would be kind of fun for, in this new franchise to have her return. But we do, of course, have the return of another semi-OG character in that they're from the fourth film, and that is a Kirby, played by Hayden Panettiere.
Now, did have to check. Maybe I'm not. I said I was a big fan of the Scream franchise, but maybe I'm not as big of a fan as I purport. I did have to check who she was. after watching it. I was like, I know I should know who she is because everybody in my theater made a really big deal about it, and all of the
Yes.
characters are acting very reverent towards her. But I was like, I really cannot really remember. So I went and checked it. I was like, oh yeah, Scream 4. She's kind of like the kind of the sidekick from that franchise. And she has a couple of memorable moments. I did watch a couple of clips from it.
Sure. I had to remind myself that she wasn't one of the bad guys, because I think for some reason,
Yes.
I remembered that it was, yeah.
Well, I think maybe it's just because that was how they brought her up. They kind of teased her. They were like, maybe she's evil in this one. And so I was like, was that maybe because she was evil in the other ones? But then I was like, no, that's not. She was just kind of along for the ride in Scream 4.
And of course, she's coming back as an FBI agent, which,
absolutely,
we've been taught to be suspicious pretty much in any Wes Craven film. We've been taught to be suspicious of anyone who's in a formal policing or really any sort of role of leadership or control. So
absolutely. Although it is complicated, of course, because she was involved. She herself is a survivor of the 2011 killings.
Let's start with this shift to New York City. So we start with our cold opening. Yeah, so for the first time in the franchise, we're not in Woodsboro, which is interesting because in many ways that town is as much of a character as are the other characters, right? Because it's this weird, like, little tiny place that happens to have all of these horrific things happening. And now we're in the big city. And from our very first cold opening with Samara Weaving, we're reminded of why New York really is a great place to have a horror film, right? Because it's full of not just alleys, but it's full of people who think that they are connected when really they're just strangers, right? And so I think that was a good way to introduce us to Scream's version of New York City.
Yeah, I thought that opening scene in which the professor, how did you feel? Because she's a professor of horror, or what was it?
Yeah,
horror comparative literature, something like that. And Laura Crane, her name.
Yes.
Being catfished by Jason in New York.
I know there were some excellent names, like, just being like, hey. And of course, Crane, for those of you that just aren't being able to make connections in the moment, because I often struggle to make connections in the moment, it gives us a nice Psycho reference, right? And so, honestly, I felt the same way that I always do when I see classroom scenes in horror movies. And that is or really anything, right? And that is that it just feels so fake. Like, it's not that I can't imagine someone as smart and as pretty as Samara Weaving as being a professor. That's not what I have struggle processing. I think it's that she clearly had money because her clothing was nice and she's in a swanky bar. And that's the part that I'm like, no professor
inaccurate.
Lives that life. But the part that is sort of this fear about retaliation and how higher ed is sort of shifting, that part felt very real to me. And very frightening because, in all of those cold openings, in several of the cold openings across the franchise, there's been this real sense that, whoever was killed was deserving in the minds of the killers of some sort of retribution, right? And one of the Screams, it is just kind of a silly, like, we watch them being killed and we realize that's the show, and then we watch that and we see it's a show. But especially, and of course, the first Scream and this most recent one, there's this real sense that they feel very entitled, right? That this person, according to the killers, deserves to die. And that part was scary as someone who teaches, to think that students or anyone, right, could think that. So we see that cold opening and we realize that there are more characters that, like, apparently all of Woodsboro really has moved to New York City, not just this, like, friend crew, but like these other people that are tangentially related to things. And so then the question becomes, what we're figuring out is, like, who is the killer, right? Because our killers from that cold opening are then killed. And that lets us know that there are many killers at play here, which I thought was also kind of an intriguing way to start the film for us.
Very reminiscent. I guess I'm just going to keep saying this. I guess very reminiscent of Scream 2, and it feels like, we're introducing multiple killers into it. I really think that this is a very smartly constructed film in terms of how it pays respect to other films within the. It's getting back to, I think, the core of what good Scream movies do. It pays respect. It's paying respect to other Scream films within the genre, but more to its point, it's really satirizing the horror of the moment and getting back to that, which I think it really allows for a lot of fun. And instead of feeling so much like a remake requel to the original Scream, it has nods structurally to the other films, with some of the other films within the genre, particularly Scream 2. But coming more of just a story set in New York, it allows this new cast to really step up to the plate. And I think 3 out of the 4 of them deliver in a really big way.
Yes, I completely agree. And I'm also, I know already who it is that you'd think doesn't step up. So here was another thing that I thought was a challenge in Scream 5. You could tell that the actors, as well as the characters, were constantly having to justify their existence in this new world, right? Whereas in Scream 6, because the characters have survived their own screaming, if you will, they weren't having to justify why we should care about these characters, why we should follow them. And that added a really just lovely level where we're already really invested in these characters. And like you said, 3 out of the 4 really deliver both in terms of performances and in terms of characters. Unfortunately, the character that is in many ways the flattest is what was originally, I think, supposed to be, Sydney 2.0, and that is Billy Loomis's daughter.
Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, I can't even remember the character's name, to be honest.
It's Sam Carpenter, played by Melissa Barrera. And I've got to agree. I think that while she's given somewhat of an interesting storyline in terms of kind of this, like, flashing back and forth between these flashes of a killer that's inside of her. And maybe that's really going to be, she's going to really get a chance to just, like, step up to the plate in Scream 6 to continue, I guess, my baseball metaphor for some reason. New York Yankees! Oh!
Yes, yes.
I'm going to drop that.
So you're talking about what you want to see maybe in Scream 7?
I think, I'm hoping that she's really going to get to take in that kind of core role, because in this one, she really just is, she's moved to New York kind of on a whim to follow Jenna Ortega's character, Tara, to college. And so she's just kind of playing this, like, kind of concerned mom-like character throughout it, who's just doesn't really have a lot going on in her own storyline aside from this kind of like, oh, am I a bad person? Am I evil? Right. And I'm like, I don't know. You haven't really done a whole lot that would really, other than show us these flashbacks that would make me actually believe any of this. So I don't know.
Right.
It was a lot more telling than showing with this character. Whereas I think, and so maybe that's what I'm saying. Maybe hopefully the sixth one will do a little bit more of that show and show her doing some actions on these kind of flat visions that she's having in her head. But right now, I just wasn't super interested in that. And I think she was ultimately the least compelling of the 4 main, what did they call themselves?
Oh, that's right.
They have a hilarious name. Oh, so the hilarious name that Chad nicknames them, the 4 survivors, is the Core 4. And they do a whole bunch of silly gags around that. And they have and so I think that just her character, Melissa character of Sam, is just ultimately the weakest of the Core 4. And all of the other ones, it's a shame because all the other ones are really fun and have a lot going on in this movie.
So there's a couple of things that I think are happening, right, with Sam. And I think that first there is exactly what you said, that so much of her story is being shown to us or is being told to us, right, instead of us getting to see it play out. And I think that the actress just has a flat affect. And that might not be, and I don't think it was as much of a problem for Scream 5. But by this point, when you have a character like Sam who already is in the story trying to figure out what her place is in the world, and you have this sort of like flat affect compared to the other 3 Core 4 who are played by more expressive actors and whose characters have more development, right? The whole point of Sam is she hasn't developed, right?
Yes. And who just have straight up more, they just have more to do. And I think it's particularly noticeable because so many of Sam's scenes are with Tara, played by Jenna Ortega, who is just such a good actress. And, like, she's really, like, her profile has really grown since Scream 5, particularly with the release of Wednesday. Of course, just kind of launching her to new heights. And I think maybe the franchise people knew that. Maybe that property was coming out, and so maybe place more emphasis on her character in this one. Or maybe just, like, they even internally realized, wait a second, Jenna Ortega's really talented, because I felt like they placed the camera on her more. They gave her a lot more really awesome reaction shots. So even when she wasn't speaking in a scene, you absolutely knew how she felt on it. And I felt in some ways some of the reactions, her reactions particularly to Sam's kind of performance, were very funny, but honestly kind of undermined Sam's performance, because you're like, oh yeah, she really is just kind of not going on, nothing going on, kind of crazy. Which, good for the movie and story that it is, but it does just kind of draw attention to kind of that performance as kind of being the weakest of the core four.
Well, and there's a moment, the moment when Tara is stabbing to death the son.
Yes.
That Ortega's performance is just outstanding. And this is, she has a really storied career. She's been acting for a very long time. And I think you're right. Whether or not that when they made the decision, I don't know, but it is very clear that in this film, they are shifting who is the Scream Queen character and who is the more, not quite Gale Weathers character, because that's not entirely who Sam is, but Sam is definitely in this film no longer the Sid. And I think that that's an important distinction to make. And also the other two members of the core four are now truly becoming not just potential fodder, right? In the first film, we don't really have time or space to know whether or not we should love them.
Yeah, because Chad and Mindy are just kind of like twins.
Yeah, exactly.
Introduced to us, and they're very funny. I think we even said that in the that they, and particularly I enjoyed Mindy's performance in Scream 5, Jasmine Savoy Brown. She was very funny in Scream 5. She did a really good kind of like homage to this original scene from Scream where you explain all the tropes of the horror. I thought that was the best part of that original movie. And so I was glad that they came back. And I was so happy that they were both given more to do. Mindy's given a girlfriend or a partner in this one. And it's R.I.P.
So...
But
so there's some great things happening with Mindy's character. I think that, again, we have a really stellar sort of performance of her character talking through the rules for the sequel of a sequel. And also, it cracks me up. There are two things that they did with that character that just crack me up. It cracks me up that she was suspicious all along of the son who's the killer. And she's constantly like giving him the evil eye, but everyone else is like, cool it, Mindy. But I also think it's hysterical that when she survives, and she's like, man, I missed it again. And I didn't predict it again. Yeah. And I thought that was just a really accurate way of building this character further and just also really capitalizing on the fact that the actress has some great comedic timing.
And I thought Chad had some really, obviously his Mason Gooding is very funny, but I also thought he had a lot of really emotional moments in this film that he did, or dramatic beats, particularly his first of all, I just want to say, as much as I love this character and actor, and I'm so happy he's going to be back in the next one, he should be dead. He was
100%.
Stabbed so many times on camera, just in front of it. Like, that guy, I guess I don't really ultimately care, because I'm excited he's back. But I thought that his, that kind of, fake death scene that they did was very good. And so I was a little bit, I guess, I felt a little bit emotionally cheated that they were going to have that moment and then bring him back. But I'm not upset that he's coming back for Scream 7. Does that make sense?
I also agree. That makes perfect sense, because that's exactly how I feel as well. Obviously, when you get attached to characters, you're not wanting them to die. But also, you don't want to assume that the core group is going to live, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this means that they're just going to do a lot of that killing in 7, but none of our core group died. Right?
I thought that was going to be the moment where it was like, oh my god, shit got real. Okay, this core, I'm sorry, core 4, that doesn't mean that we're protected. We're not, we're not above being cannon fodder. But then it was just kind of like, nope, magic god powers of story.
Yeah.
The story
we even
says
have that
I
with
survived.
Gale.
Yes.
Yeah, even Gale, should have died. We should have lost one of them. And I don't know if they were just giving us kindness after Dewey or what it was, but I did feel
Since
cheated.
They couldn't bring Sydney back, they were like, we can't really, we can't afford to lose more core members. But I was like, I don't know. I do think at a certain point you don't want to sacrifice like what feels like, I guess, like character sympathy
Yeah, I
and
don't know. It's
nostalgia
tricksy. Yeah.
for story purposes.
So this film gave us a continuation of another sort of homage to Scream 2 in that just like in Scream 2, we find out who's the killer. It's the family, right,
Right.
of the killer from the first one. In this one, it's the same thing, right? The killer ends up being the dad, the daughter, and the son. We have our first three, I almost said threesome, that's not right. We have our first set of three killers. We're continuing the family. I will say, of course, I was surprised that the daughter was still alive, right?
Yeah.
Because that, that was the one of the sort of twists. And also they did a really good job of making it clear that the son should have been suspicious, right? As the outsider, and sort of like purposefully creating this red herring by drawing attention to the red herring. But I will say that like it wasn't really, it wasn't a surprise for me. It wasn't a surprise person I was watching the film with that the police officer was the killer. And I don't know if that's just because we've seen all these Scream films before, or we've seen other Wes Craven films, but I was not as surprised, I guess, by the twist reveal as I have been in previous films, which was upsetting to me because it felt like the twist reveal took a lot more time in this film.
Yeah, I agree. It's because it's not like Scream doesn't have a history of like underdeveloped secondary killers. But I think like in terms of in those like that second tier slot, like I mean, the Scream 2 is a perfect example. As much as I love Laurie Metcalf's killer, who I can't even really remember who the secondary killer is in that movie.
It's that like film kid.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I remember that now that you're saying it, but
I don't remember his name.
But so it's not like that's super uncommon. I think just the fact that it was so obvious in this film. And maybe it's because, surprisingly, I was looking at the cast, it is a bit of a smaller ensemble. So I think maybe there are just straight up, when you keep in mind the people who have to die, there are just straight up less options of who it could be. Like, it really did come down to, like, it's either this cop or it is Kirby. Like, it's one force. Right. I guess it's like either the federal government and policing is bad or your local police are bad in terms of who the killer is going to be for this one. And I went with the local killer, so it wasn't too police officer, so it wasn't too much of a, I thought it made sense story-wise, but it was very obvious. And maybe they took so long just because they were like, we really just hope you have fun with these characters, which I did. So I see the problem, but I enjoyed the ride there so much that even when I was kind of ultimately disappointing who the killer, or really really predictable is perhaps the better way, who these killers were, and their demise was like, actually, their demise was kind of awesome to witness. That's where we got that awesome Jenna Ortega moment. So, you know what? I recognize that maybe it's a story problem, but it was executed well enough with actors I enjoyed enough, and they were given smart enough dialogue that I was willing to go with it, even if killer's pretty unsatisfying.
Yeah, there definitely were some intriguing elements. There was a moment where the dad says something about, like when your joy and hope and as a son dies, and then they move the camera to the other son, and he's like, "Oh, Dad, I didn't know," and you see this like disappointed look on his face. There were these moments that let us kind of see the potential of what would happen if an entire family went on this sort of rampage. I think what I would have appreciated was either knowing who the killers were earlier so we could think a little bit more about what would the dynamics be of a family of killers who are doing it for the most beloved son who's no longer there, or if in the sort of final battle scene, there had been a few more moments where we kind of got to see that like maybe they're not all on the same page. I don't know. There was just something that for me made that last scene very interesting action-wise, and gave us some really great fight scenes and stuff like that. And it was set in a really great location that was spooky. And of course, we have all these props from all of the previous films in the franchise, which was super cool. But there was just something in terms of the narrative that dropped for me. And maybe that's the price you pay, right? That's the price you pay for that final act of violence, is that you're just going to have spectacles, that you're just going to have a little less narrative cohesion. But I felt that by the time we had the big reveal, my emotions were no longer at play, particularly because apparently no one was going to really die, even as my excitement of the slasher part of things was intensifying. Now, you said that there was a different plan originally for...
I mean, a different plan in terms of when there were different people in charge of the franchise. Yeah, so prior to the release of Scream 4, original writer Kevin Williamson, he had mapped out Scream 5 and 6, but decided, or maybe not decided is the right word, was told by the studio that they were going to wait to see how the film did box office wise before agreeing to produce any more films within that kind of version of the Screamverse.
I see.
In 2014, Williamson announced that Scream 4 was supposed to kick off a new trilogy of films, but did not take off in the way that they had hoped. And then he obviously said I guess not obviously, but he said he was not going to be involved any further. And then that he and Craven and the team were done with the Scream franchise. And then obviously Craven passed pretty soon after that. And so he was obviously not going to ever be able to come back to Scream. Mm-hmm. Williamson's not really interested in coming back. And then, but in that initial pitch, Scream 5 was going to be basically Scream 2 again, but with following Jill Roberts. So that is the Emma Roberts character on being stalked by a killer in a college campus. So basically exactly Scream 2. Similar to this, not gonna lie.
But isn't Jill the bad guy?
Is Jill the bad guy?
Yeah, I thought she and one of the Culkin brothers. I mean, obviously it's the actor, but maybe it means that Scream 4 was going to be different.
I think maybe it meant that it was going to be different, but that was the original plan.
Interesting.
Or maybe it was just going to be like she kind of does survive and then has to live with this kind of. I don't know. I have no idea. But that was the original plan, and then Scream 6 was going to feature Gale Weathers and Dewey as like the main characters in some way. So I guess kind of more of what we got in the last film.
Mm-hmm.
But that was kind of the OG plan for that.
Do you know anything more about what's going to happen with Scream 7?
Ooh, I don't know any more about what's going to happen with Scream 7, other than the fact that they have said that they are very hopeful that there is going to be another one. And so I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing another Scream.
So I'll tell you what I would like to see for Scream 7. Let me just, simple answer is, as of recording this, and we are recording this on April 20th, 2023, but the film has not been officially greenlit yet. Directors have been talking about it, and people involved with it have been talking about it, and are saying they're hopeful, but it has not been officially greenlit by the studio yet. Okay. Well, since obviously the people making Scream 7 are listening to this podcast.
Of course. Hello.
I will tell you, what I would like to see is some sort of strangers on a train type premise of a couple of people. The premise behind Strangers on Train is that they realize that if they kill each other's person that they are wanting to murder, then they have an alibi. Not only do they have an alibi, but there would be nothing to connect the killer to this stranger, or it wouldn't make sense as motivation. And I think it would be kind of interesting if we had a similar sort of premise where we're trying to figure out who could be the killer, and we're realizing like it just doesn't make any sense because the motivation doesn't make sense with who we think it is, or the different people being killed. Like there's just two strains of people being murdered. And then, of course, we realize that it's some sort of strangers on a train type thing. Because there's a hint of that, I think, in Scream 1 with Billy and Stu, where, they're kind of taking out each other's people, but they're also, working much more in tandem. But I think I would like to see that, because I think that this Scream 6 did a good job of reminding us that the Scream killers always have a legacy and a connection to the characters. But what I really just don't want to see in Scream 7 is a repeat of Scream 3, where it's like, hey, wait, here's an entire backstory that you didn't know about. And it turns out that Stu also had a child that we're just now going to introduce. Like, I just don't want it to have the equivalent of you have a brother. So
okay, but now if Stu does decide to come back, as they do tease in a single line in this, which as a Stu stan, I did catch.
Oh, I would be willing to have Stu back, just not his kid.
Okay. Oh, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I just wanted to make clear on the record that I, to the Scream 7 people
Oh
who are
my
going to
gosh,
greenlight the film.
please.
I am publicly in favor of bringing back Matthew Lillard.
I think everyone is, right?
Yeah, I feel like everybody is. It would be, as much as I'd love to have Sydney back, I think that they could have, I would rather have Stu if I could only have one.
Yes. And I think that Stu would be interesting because he would kind of take over the Cotton Weary role of, this person
point.
that we can't quite trust, but also do we trust? I mean, I don't know if I need Stu to be the killer, right? I think I'd be also okay with seeing how has he dealt with the repercussions of this. I'm also okay with him being the killer. I just really don't want Screen 7 to take the whole but wait, there's a secret sibling that you never knew about from that time that your parent was in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I just need it to not go there, I think.
I also hope it doesn't get just too overly meta like the third one.
Yes,
I feel like it got by the third one it was it had kind of gotten away from being a genre critique of the horror industry to a larger satire of the film industry and specifically the town that films are made in, which, as we talked about on our episode about Scream 3, which you can definitely check out, really kind of made the film, it's interesting, we both really liked it, but we have to acknowledge is definitely kind of inaccessible to a large part of the horror audience who would actually be consuming the film.
Exactly. So I don't want Scream 7 to suffer the fate of Scream 3 in that it just removes itself a little bit too much from the equation. And I also think that now is the time to play with some of the other ways in which a killer could be brought into this world. And of course, also, it'd be amazing to have Matthew Lillard back. Yes,
agreed. Everything you said, and greenlight Screen 7.
Thank you so much for listening to our Eerie Extra, which of course is in addition to our regular content. So we appreciate you being excited to hear even more from us. Toni, if they want to reach out to us, what should people do?
They can get in touch with us by following us on social medias, or you can reach out to us at our email, which is in the description of this podcast. You can also give us a like or review wherever you get your podcast from, and tell your friends about us. We'd love to bring more people into the horror community and get more people conversing about horror. See what I did there?
I did. It was excellent. This episode is going to come out whenever Jackson finishes editing it, so I can't tell you what's up next, but I can tell you that Toni and I are so thankful to Jackson for absolutely everything that he does and making it sound like we always know what we're talking about instead of having to occasionally pause to look things up. So thank you so much, Jackson.
Yeah, we really appreciate all the time you put into this.
And to you, our listeners, thank you so much for listening to our nightmares.
And have a spooktacular day.